Hi everyone and welcome to my boss guide for Varshan. In Season 4, Blizzard has introduced the so-called Tormented versions of all of the boss ladder bosses. These are level 200, they have a lot more damage, a lot more HP, and they are also a lot more rewarding than the regular versions. So as soon as possible, you want to try to start farming those bosses to get your uniques and uber uniques, and in general just get a lot of really good loot from them. And there are some mechanics to be aware of in order to take them down. In particular, all of those tormented bosses have a debuff that can ramp up over time if you get hit by certain abilities that increase the damage taken. You can see this here on the bottom right now. I have 2 stacks of this debuff. There's a red skull here. This is a tormented debuff, and you take more and more damage the more you fail in the fight and get hit by specific abilities. So this overwhelms you really quickly, and most of the time, from my experience, it was almost impossible to survive more than 2 or 3 of those stacks. So there is a bit of room for mistakes, but not really all that much. So let's get into it. In the case of Varshan, there is exactly one way to get those debuffs, which is from the ground effect. So this is here where you have the dance phase. And if you get hit by any of those 4 hits, you will get an extra stack of tormented debuff. So especially if you don't take Varshan down very fast, you will have to do this dance phase very frequently and try to dodge it properly, because this ramps up very quickly and then you're gonna fail. So there are different dance patterns, and the visual clarity of this is very low. This might be improved in the final patch, because I actually gave a lot of feedback about this to Blizzard, about those bosses, in particular Varshan and the visual clarity. It's very difficult to read where you have to stand, because they come one after the other really quickly with all the same colors. And you can see here right now that they kind of overlap and they blend into each other. So for example, one has just happened, and then another one is here about to go off. I have to go to the left. And here I got hit. And then the next one is already coming out as the first one is still disappearing, basically. So it's very hard to really understand where you need to stand. I hope that is improved, but if not, then you have to kind of get a feel for those patterns, and it's not really that much of a way around it. And you saw here right now, I had 5 of those stacks, and I just abandoned the fight because the boss was still very tanky, and he just takes me down with a few attacks at this point. So if you ramp up those tormented debuffs, it's over pretty quickly. Now there are 2 ways to play around those dance patterns. Number 1 is you just have immunities. So if you're playing a Sorc, you rejoice, I guess. Or maybe even as a Necromancer, you can do Blood Mist. But other classes don't really have that luxury. So in that case, you have to do the dances properly. And this means usually that you either stand very close to Varshan. He usually doesn't move very much. If you don't move him specifically, he just tends to stay in the middle if you're in melee range. And you can just kind of dance around him. Or you can also go to the side. So there are a lot of patterns that are actually easier to dodge if you run to the outside of the arena. In particular, if you're a ranged build, this might be a good strategy. So usually you can just go, for example, down here to the corner. And then, okay, in this case, you have to sidestep it. But there are some of those patterns that actually don't even reach the corner. So you see this here right now, you can easily just stand on this entire bottom part of the arena, for example, for the next hit. And then you get to stance around to the next side here again. And similar, for example, here we have another safe spot where like the entire corner of the arena is just clean. So this is what I felt was the easiest way to avoid it. However, you still have to be on your toes. You still have to react, because sometimes those patterns actually do go all the way to where you're standing, and at least you have to dodge like left or right or something. And the other way is to just kind of dance around him directly in melee range, because you just have to do like 1 or 2 steps to actually get out of one of the patterns. But on the other hand, it's also the hardest to read where exactly they will spawn. It goes really fast. I think it's like 1 pop per second or something, so it's like a 4-second phase, and you have to dodge 4 of those hits. So in some cases it can be really tight, and standing in the middle is just more difficult, but usually more effective in terms of DPS. If you want to do more damage, especially if you play a build that requires to be in melee range, then you should try to be in the center and not try to cheese it from the outside. However, it's easier to do from the outside, basically. Now there are like 4 or maybe 5 different patterns that can occur here, but they all have one thing in common. There's always 4 hits, and they always like have this like blend into each other animation. So you want to make sure that you pay really close attention to where the safe spots are as soon as the phase starts. Varshan always goes to the center of the arena in case you're tanking him on the side here, for example. He always goes to the middle, and then he does the dance pattern. And frankly, it's just kind of difficult to predict which one it's going to be. Like you usually have to see like the first 1 or 2, and then you just dodge the rest, basically. There is a bit of like, yeah, like practice that you just need to acquire in order to dodge this properly. But the one that is the easiest to read and dodge is the circular one here. So there's like an anti-clockwise pattern that he does that you can see here right now. So as soon as you see this, that's like kind of the freebie. So you can usually even use that phase to do a bit of damage and just go kind of close to him. And you can kind of just like run a tiny half circle around him and the phase is already over. So that's the easiest. And then depending on your initial positioning, it may be easier to either be close to him or far away from him to dodge those mechanics. If you can do the dances, then you have already one half of the fight and the other half is taking down those ads here very quickly. So every so often he spawns 3 of those malignant monsters. They have different abilities and then he starts consuming each of them one by one. And if he succeeds in consuming them, Varshan gets an extra buff for I don't know how long, quite a while, maybe even the rest of the fight. Either way, you want to really make sure that he does not eat any of his minions, because those buffs that he gets are kind of crazy. So depending on which one he eats, he gets like different buffs. One just gives him like extra damage, I believe, or like some dot effect. Another one gives him a barrier. He already has a barrier by default, but then he gets, I think, a bigger barrier more often or so, and that makes him very, very tanky. And I think one gives him like extra just resource drain and CC. So there's a lot of nasty stuff going on for those ads. Personally, I have never really succeeded in taking him down if he ever ate one of those ads. So you really want to avoid that. This means you don't have to ping just single target damage, but you also want to have some burst to take down those ads. Either by taking them one by one or just nuke them all down. In this case here, for example, I played Barrage. It was very easy because the arrows just ricochet to those targets here automatically. So I didn't have a problem. But if you have like a somewhat slow pace build that has to maybe set up like a wombo combo, some big burst or something, then you want to make sure that you can do that quickly in order to just, you know, bonk those ads one by one. Like let's say you play like a Death Blow Barb or so, then you kind of have to go around and do like one by one and also see which one Varshan is consuming. He does that pretty quickly. You see this here. He starts channeling a beam towards one of the ads and you have maybe 3 seconds or 5 seconds or so to take down that ad before he consumes it. And if he does that, you have a problem. And if you kill that ad, then he will switch to the next one and then he'll start consuming that one. And then he switches to the last one and he will start consuming that one. So he just does it like one after the other and you have to take them down either one by one or just as quickly as possible. The ads themselves are not actually really threatening when they attack you unless you have a lot of these tormented debuffs. So kind of the same story as always. If you stack up too many of those debuffs, then the fight just becomes so hard and you can't really sustain the incoming damage anymore. But if you have like 1 or 2 stacks, the ads are just fine as long as you take them down before Varshan consumes them. So the ad phase is usually just very short. Generally, the auto attacks of Varshan are not really that threatening, so you can kind of just tank him in melee range. However, they are very annoying because they apply these crowd controls and they also burn your resources sometimes. So if that is like a bit of a concern for your build, you want to try to come here with a bit more unstoppable than usual and also a bit more resource generation than usual so that you can somewhat easily just tank his auto attacks and they deal more damage to him in those normal phases where you don't have to dance, because this is really the only DPS window that you have. And that already concludes this guide. So it's a very straightforward encounter as long as you understand you have to do the dances properly and you have to take down those ads as fast as possible. And if you do those 2 things, then you will succeed. However, this is easier said than done, especially this dancing. If you fight this boss for like multiple minutes, you have to do this like 10 times or more. And you can very easily take a hit or 2, and then the fight starts becoming kind of tough. So it just comes down a little bit to like learning the encounter, getting a bit of a feel for the patterns. And as I mentioned, you can try to make it a bit easier by going to the outside, because it just gives you more time to react to those patterns going out, and you can see them a bit more clearly. And there's usually a bit more space. But when you take down Varshan successfully, then you get rewarded with lots of loot and also the materials that you need for summoning Duriel, of course. And especially the Tormented version is just so rewarding. You want to do this as much as possible. And with that, I hope this guide helps you in Season 4. Wish you good luck, and I'll see you guys in the next one.